Hey everyone, Jay Andrews, Ascendance Coaching. Today I want to talk about the difference between proactive and reactive leadership. And proactive leadership really is the way that whether you're leading a country, a company, whether that's a large corporation or a small business, even like Ascendance Coaching, or just even the way you're leading your personal life. To be proactive is always better than to be reactive as a start point. We have a really good example in the UK right now of a reactive Prime Minister, and you can see the effect that it's having on the entire country. You see, there's a theory in business that culture comes from the top down. It's the same in politics. It's the same in in family structures, in just generally in life. And so where you have such a reactive administration running a country, it has a trickle-down effect. So the example I'm giving, of course, is of this current Labour administration and their reactive policies. A classic example a few weeks ago was when hundreds of people, including elderly people, disabled people, who, by the way, I tried to be apolitical, but they were protesting against the literal genocide going on in Gaza. But even take that out of the picture, just the fact that a policy could be so flawed, and this is my point, is that the policy that made the police go and have to actually arrest all those people, which I doubt many people in the police, I mean, you might have the odd psychopath in there who might enjoy it, but I know many police officers who are just good people doing their job, and I doubt many of them wanted to be I doubt many of them were taking joy in, dragging old people, were just ordinary people protesting against one of the most, probably the most horrific crime of the 21st century. All because of a reactive policy designed to appease the Israel lobby, or perhaps the political right, you could say, in this country. The thing is, though, that's not even a political decision from Keir Starmer. It's reactive. And how do we know this? Because the same administration, the same Prime Minister, passed an extremely reactive policy, which directly affects the sector that Ascendance Coaching does operate in, which is education, and that is removing the VAT exemption from independent schools. So independent schools used to be exempt from paying VAT, which, for those of you who don't know, is value added tax. It means basically charging 20% more for everything. So what that has in effect meant is that independent schools have to now pay VAT, people who are sending their children to independent schools have to pay VAT. So the schools have to increase their fees by 20%. Now, for the ultra elite in society, that might not be a problem, but there are many people who are, either potentially prioritizing education for their children, who are doing well, who are financially successful, but not from that ultra sort of elite class where another 20% isn't a problem. If we're talking tens of thousands of pounds, you can imagine that that extra 20% might be, is in many cases the difference between private school being affordable, a difficult expense, but education is, I believe it's the most important priority a family can have, hence why that's the service that Ascendance provides. So you can have a really well-meaning, well-intentioned family who just want the best for their children, who now can't afford to send their child to an independent school. So now state schools, which, as I'm on the record of saying many times, are not fit for purpose, not because of the schools or the teachers, but because of a deeply flawed education system, are now even more overwhelmed and, full to the brim, and I believe on the point of complete collapse. And then who gets squeezed the hardest out of all of this? Well, as usual, it's the most vulnerable in society. It's those who perhaps were in independent schools before because they needed specialist provisions. Well, now perhaps they can't afford to be in those independent schools, despite whatever sacrifices the parents might have made. And it's the people who are struggling with the cost of living, who, you know, as the former pupils of the independent schools go into the state schools, it pushes everyone kind of down, and you've got the schools at the very bottom due to the sort of marketization policies, which I'll talk about in another video. These schools end up being complete kind of no-go zones unless people are absolutely desperate, and they end up with basically no education because teachers are so burned out, underpaid. And yeah, I blame none of this stuff on teachers, by the way. Of course, you have good and bad teachers, like good and bad cops. But for the most part, teachers are doing extremely hard work for very low wages. So this, again, is an example of reactive policy because it's designed to appease the political left. So you've got Starmer trying to appease the political right, the Israel lobby, and the political left, because at a cursory glance, that policy about the VAT on private schools, it looks like, well, wealth redistribution, more tax on rich families, therefore the poor get more money. What it actually looks like is everyone suffers ultimately, other than the ultra elite who it doesn't affect. So Starmer is never setting the tone in his leadership. It's reacting to this, reacting to that. And for someone who used to be the director of public prosecutions, which is one of the highest legal jobs one can have, I find it baffling. I find it baffling that someone could get to such a position of power and be so reactive in all the way that they do things. As a prime minister, I constantly try and look for the strategy there. What's really going on? What's the bigger picture? And yet I can't seem to find it. The final point I want to make, though, is that, like I said, this reactive type policy, it has a trickle-down effect on society, and we're living in a very reactive society right now. You have divide and rule going on, which is an age-old tactic where, people on, let's say, people being lumped in the group as the far right are reacting to what they perceive to be the immigration crisis. You've then got a counter-reaction to that. Everyone is reacting. Everyone is not really thinking through, what do I actually believe in? What do I stand for? And what do I want to fight for if I have to fight for anything? It's all just, reacting to the next thing or this thing or that thing. Well, as sentence coaching, that's not how we're doing things. If we were reacting, we'd be trying to take advantage of, every little piece of news, trying to make money in small ways here and there where we can. We're actually taking losses at the moment because we're looking at the bigger picture. We're seeing that, in actual fact, the education system is in serious trouble, and just to be a part of it, even if in the short term that would be more profitable, is in the long term helping feed something which is really destroying a generation. So I'm not prepared to be a part of that. So ascendance coaching is taking a proactive stance, and I may not be the leader of a massive corporation, and I can't imagine the pressures that someone like, the Prime Minister or the head of a massive corporation would be under. That, you don't know what you don't know is one of my favorite mantras. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I could do a better job. Although instinctively I feel like I could. I can't say that. What I can say, though, is that ascendance coaching is taking a proactive stance on the education sector. We are setting a tone of what we believe the education sector should look like. And, in an era that I believe is going to come to pass when this current system collapses, as I think it inevitably will, we're ready and waiting to set the tone. proactively.